pretty cool that I've gotten to use my sword a few times for these videos. Who would have thought? Welcome to the Wednesday lesson here at the Order of Eden. Today we are continuing our trek through church history, and we are finally talking about the Knights Templar. I've been wanting to talk about them ever since we actually started the Crusades series, but of course last week, like I explained, I had to split things up a little bit. So today, finally, the Knights Templar. Okay, so where did they come from? So after the First Crusade, when the Catholic armies retook Jerusalem, the Holy Land was a relatively safe place for pilgrims to travel to. The problem was, the roads getting there were not. In the year 1119, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ in the Temple of Solomon, better known as the Knights Templar, were created. They were a monastic group centered in Jerusalem, and they were utterly unique at their time. They had the piety of monks and the training of knights. These holy warriors were tasked with keeping the roads between the Holy Land and Europe safe. They actually became some of the earliest international bankers, allowing pilgrims to deposit money with them in Europe and then withdrawing it in Jerusalem so that they wouldn't have to travel such a long distance with large sums of money on them. The knights were much loved by the people for the role they played in protecting them as they were on pilgrimages to the Holy Land. And quickly, all sorts of people started donating vast amounts of wealth to the organization. They would also fight on the battlefields during some of the later Crusades, and they were some of the most feared groups of soldiers around. It's said that they were mostly mounted on horseback with lances or pikes, and that they would start by singing a hymn and then silently charging into battle. Time after time, they would just regroup and then smash back into the front lines. As monks who felt that their destinies were secure, they rode fearlessly into battle. One of the reasons that the knights were so feared on the battlefield is because they were known to never surrender. They would just keep fighting until all of them were dead if necessary. Their Wikipedia page, that amazing source, says this. Based on their mix of donations and business dealings, the Templars established financial networks across the whole of Christendom. They acquired large tracts of land both in Europe and in the Middle East. They bought and managed farms and vineyards. They built massive stone cathedrals and castles. They were involved in manufacturing, import, and export. They had their own fleet of ships, and at one point they even owned the entire island of Cyprus. The Order of the Knights Templar arguably qualifies as the world's first multinational corporation. They gained so much wealth and influence across the world that they quickly became a political target. In the early 1300s, the Pope tried to get the Knights Templar to merge with other military monastic groups, but to no effect. And another really interesting issue with this group is that since the Knights Templar were spread out all across the world, they were technically only under the authority of the Pope. They were actually considered outside of the law of any nation that they were in. After some time, because of all these political issues, there were many kings who highly opposed the Knights Templar, and certain popes didn't like the power that they thought the organization had. And after the main Crusades in the Middle East, the general popularity of the Knights Templar started to diminish, even though their power and influence continued to grow. On Friday the 13th, in October of 1307, there were a series of mass arrests all across Europe. They started arresting the heads of the Knights Templar. They arrested them on a whole series of strange charges that are almost universally considered to be completely falsified. These charges included denying Christ, having initiates spit on the cross, worshipping idols, worshipping the goat figure Baphomet, and worshipping a mummified skull that they claimed was the head of John the Baptist. The knights were heavily tortured until they confessed to these presumably made-up charges, and in 1310, most of the heads of the Knights Templar were burned at the stake. And the other knights that recanted were able to join other Catholic military monastic organizations. Now, there are a ton of conspiracy theories surrounding this organization that I can't begin to know the reality of. But here's what I can say. The idea that a group that established untold wealth and influence, who had gotten used to being a law unto themselves, a state within a state, as it were, the idea that they all folded up shop as soon as things went south seems incredibly unrealistic to me. And like I said, while the trials were public and horrific, a large majority of the knights survived, and they were able to take a lot of the organization's established wealth and go into other military monastic organizations. Again, that year was 1310. Now, the Freemasons link themselves back to the building of Solomon's Temple around 1000 BC. No one can say if that's true, but they do say that they link through the Knights Templar. The earliest record of Freemasons comes from a document called the Old Charges, which is still studied today. And that's from the year 1425. The Knights Templar were one of the most wealthy and powerful organizations of their time. I'm not going to claim that after they were forced to go underground, that they transformed into an organization that's still with us 600 years after the earliest documents talk about them. I wouldn't say that. But anyway, you feel free to follow that rabbit hole as you will. That's gonna be it for me today. From everyone involved with the Order of Eden, thanks for watching. I hope it was a blessing, or at the very least, interesting. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.